Thank you very much for inviting me to explain about the super project. I'm going to show you some of the results that we had about the developments that we could measure from 2000 to 2018, and some of the results where we tried to predict what could happen between 2020 and 2050. So I've titled this Past, Present, and Future Developments. So the emphasis is more on showing you facts and figures and possible pathways, and less on, let's say, policy developments. That was another major part of our project, but one that you'll have to look at if you're interested elsewhere. I want to say just a few words about the way we approach the project. There's always a call by ESPON where they want you to do some research, and everyone puts in bids to do the research. And in the call, they asked to look at the phenomena land take and urban sprawl. And well, we found that very interesting, but we found that both terms were very normative. So what we did also in our project is we reframed the terminology. That's something that you'll see today. Many things I'm talking about seem like urban sprawl, but I'm using slightly different terminology. And we know that land take, for example, is being used by the European Commission with their no net land take goal. We say that sounds very normative. Let's just call that urbanization, because that's actually what is going on. You're changing non-urban land into urban use land, and that's something that we can measure. The same with urban sprawl. Very slippery concept, very normative in the sense that nobody wants sprawl. We say, let's just talk about urban form, see if we can measure that as well. And sustainability, you can take different types of views. We took a very broad view in our project. So we look at economic sustainability and social sustainability in addition to ecological sustainability. Just a bit of a warm-up there about how we approach this. So yeah, using the term urbanization, what do you see when you take a look at this data? And this data is very comprehensive. We are very blessed actually to start the project just as the 2018 data came out, and we're able to break up into 3 periods how the land use in Europe has evolved. And you see on the right an animated GIF that I made. Here you actually see at the regional level the intensification of urban use in Europe, and you see areas which were already urban and urbanizing even more, and areas that were much less urban and becoming more urban. It's generally a one-way road, we've noticed. About 8 times more land is converted to urban use than is converted back. And we also looked at what kind of land is being developed. Generally, it's agricultural. Some, especially in the more Nordic countries, you see more nature area being converted. We're a long way off from that zero no net land take or zero urbanization. Every day in this whole period, it was about 180 hectares being developed, or we said 250 football fields, give you perspective on how much that is. Of course, that's European level. If you zoom in on countries, you see different things happening. And this already shows the adage that ESPON always says, territory matters. Different things are happening in different countries. So yeah, the big countries seem to urbanize more. That's not very surprising. But you see also different trends. Look at Spain, for example, the second one. Biggest urbanizer in Europe in the first period, and then it decreased quite a bit. And a lot of that urban development were construction sites, which were probably abandoned later. At the very bottom, you see the UK. That's going up. So you see that there's some countries which are urbanizing more and more, and ones they're urbanizing less and less. And also what is being produced changes. So you have France with a lot of housing development, and the UK with more industrial or business development. Incidentally, UK and Netherlands also have a lot of urban green development, so parks and things like that. That's also counted as urbanization. But you can also think about, well, should you really be penalized in terms of sustainability in that sense? Many ways you can measure it according to per capita rates or increasing, declining rates, all that. What we decided to do is just to make a benchmark. And this is one of my favorite maps, where you just look at your region as opposed to the European average. And just taking population development as a kind of a ratio here, are you developing more than the urban average, or more than the European average in terms of land use, urbanization, with respect to your population, or are you doing less? So if you look at the light blue areas, those are areas where the population is growing faster than European average, but the urbanization is below, which would indicate a relatively compact development. And the light red one is the opposite. There the population is growing less than European average, but it's urbanizing more. So maybe if you think those are areas which might be less sustainable. So yeah, that's let's say the urbanization side. How much is being produced, how much land is being converted in absolute or relative figures. Of course, we all know that's only part of the picture when you look at sustainability. Part of it is how it's urbanizing in terms of urban form. The big debate on sprawl isn't only about density and land cover. It's also about how this is being developed. If it's car dependent, for example, or being compact. This is hard to measure, and rather than doing, let's say, a sophisticated machine learning kind of exercise, we decide to evaluate by hand all 1,300, 1,400 NUTS 3 regions. And we did that by using a topology of regions, which you see in the middle, and then we just eyeballed it. We've looked visually at what's going on. And we made a distinction between what you see first, and that is on the left, you see one kind of big glob urban area and the rest. And on the right, you see two big main areas. So the first would be a kind of monocentric one, and the other one is a two. And then when you look outside of those areas, what do you see? And so the first one, you see many small scattered villages, and on the right, you see kind of lots of development along roadways. And so then we coded this according to that. And we said, well, the main structure is what you see first, and the substructure is what you see second. And of course, a lot of the development, the recent development, happens in the substructure. So that's also a very important thing when you urban sprawl and changes. And we were able to, since we evaluated all these regions, to map this out. And you see on the left, the main structure, and you see on the right, the substructure. And not very surprisingly, the substructure is more scattered or diffuse than the main structure. But you see clear variations between countries and regions. You also see that polycentric is the most predominant urban form that we have in Europe. And that confirms other ESPON studies as well. Looking at the development, what happened between 2000 and 2018 in the substructure outside the main urban agglomerations, that's quite interesting. You see, especially in these areas in Poland, rapid or extensive development in the substructure. So very diffuse development, characterizing especially Poland. So taking this idea of there are different pathways of development. You can develop, let's say, compact, close to cities, at high densities, on the one hand, as opposed to developing piecemeal along country roads on the other hand. And then looking in the middle, let's say, at the more polycentric, which is, let's say, one of the main development types in Europe, also many times steered by planning. We created these three scenarios for urbanization. So I think this is familiar to many people, but we worked them out in the report, where we tried to say that the main variable is society, and society wants this particular development for various reasons. And then we made a narrative where the economic and demographic structure is kept constant, but it's the choices that people make and governments make which changes. And then we looked at what would happen in 2050. Now, I've done a bit of reflection on this because this was done pre-COVID, and I've also wrote a paper on this where I think actually these three scenarios are COVID-proof in the sense that within the COVID period, you had the same debates. Some people were saying, oh, COVID is going to mean that people are going to want more walkable cities and they want to be able to see people. Amsterdam, for example, is more popular than ever in terms of the housing market. People were also saying that community is important. After COVID, people want to still have this community feeling, but in small, medium-sized communities. And then some people say, no, COVID means that everyone wants a car, their own home in the countryside, and that's what's going to happen in the future. I think the jury is still out, and there are different things happening in Europe. What we did in our project, getting back to the three scenarios, is we ran it through a land allocation model. So this predicts the demand for urban land at the NUTS 2 level, and then allocates this according to a certain logic at a very fine level of detail. And so the main logic was good road accessibility near urban areas, that sort of thing. And we were able to tweak the model in certain ways to give emphasis according to our scenario logic. So that's how we were able to illustrate the scenarios using this land use model. I'm going to talk about the two most extreme models. That's the compact versus diffuse. Here's the output for 2050. You probably can't see any difference between the two. So then you have to zoom in and see what's going on in terms of output. So if you look in the Belgian region, for example, which was already quite, let's say, polycentric and diffuse, this is what happens when the compact scenario comes. You see a lot of development, and that's in dark red, clinging to the edges of the larger cities. And the open space that was there already remains more or less open. This is the diffuse Belgium. So you see already quite, going back and forth a couple times, quite a difference between what happens in Belgium. Moving to southern Germany here, you see the same thing. Here's what happens in its compact development. This is what happens with diffuse development. This is in Warsaw, zooming in on just one area. This is diffuse. This you don't see as much change, also because of the amount of demand. Here's one in Vilnius. And so, yeah, of course, if you look at your own region, if maybe you saw your own region in this model, we have it for most of Europe, you'll probably say, oh, this is inaccurate. This is not going to happen. Well, of course not. We're not really predicting here exactly what's going to happen. It's more of a thought exercise using a model which is blind to the locational specificities, local policies, that sort of thing, and just taking a few variables into account. Still, even though it's not, let's say, completely realistic, I think and I believe that it's very good to initiate a political discussion about what's desirable. So I'll talk about that more later. Another nice thing that the model can do is it can tally up what happens at the European level, or you can disaggregate it to a national level if you want. For example, in each model, how does this convert to urban growth, the urbanization levels? Are you getting closer to that zero known net land take in one scenario as opposed to another scenario, for example? Or on the right, how does this change population densities, growing or declining in each model? So that sort of thing. Another thing that we did in the super project, and this is a very big table, but you can look at the main project results if you're interested, is we decided to look at the sustainability of each of the scenarios according to what the scientific literature says. So if we could find sources that say that generally in compact development, you have, for example, more biodiversity than in diffuse, then we were able to give a plus or a minus. And in the main report, we cited which publications we used in this. And what's interesting is here you have a lot of contradictions. You have a lot of plus and minuses, but you have also you have trade-offs between, let's say, dimensions of sustainability between, for example, economic and ecological. Well, that's a well-known one, but also within. So, for example, within ecological sustainability, you have trade-offs as well. So I think that's something that we want to emphasize, that this is all, in the end, normative and political, and it should be. People should have a democratic debate on this. So getting to the conclusions here, one of our main conclusions is that, it's not just about land take, it's also about urban form, and urban form also matters. You can't change it very quickly, and it doesn't change overnight, so you inherit a lot of your urban form. But still, when we looked at that last 20-year period, we do see some differences. We see different pathways within Europe. And because of that, you can say, well, what would happen if our region embarks on one pathway as opposed to another? And then the model really helps. You can then take the two visions, let's say, of your area in 2050, and ask yourself which areas become red and which remain, let's say, green. And is that something we want? Which one do we think is more desirable? Are we moving towards an urban structure, which we think is something that is in line with our philosophy? And you can link this to other types of, let's say, more mid-range ideas like car use. Do you have a goal to limit car use? And is the predicted urban structure conducive to that? Same with public services. And in the end, it's all about trade-offs, because when you decide for, let's say, compact development, it's not, let's say, sustainable across the board. So you're giving up other things as well. And that should be also a societal debate. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions concerning my talk, please put it in the chat. This is just one very small piece of a much wider project. So please feel free to consult the main research. And as a last, let's say, plug, we also created for policymakers a guide. So if you're interested in controlling some of these developments, we've tried to amass a number of interesting practices to inspire you to do that. Thank you very much.